My boss chose Mother's Day to destroy my career. In front of clients, employees, and both our mothers, he accused me of corruption and humiliation-worthy misconduct I didn't commit. What he didn't know was that his own mother had spent weeks secretly investigating the company, and she walked into the event carrying evidence that could destroy him instead. The first time I met my boss's mother, I didn't even know who she was. She came into the office 3 winters ago, wearing a gray wool coat and carrying a leaking umbrella that dripped all over the marble lobby floor. Everyone ignored her because they thought she was another confused elderly visitor. Our receptionist kept talking on her AirPods while the woman stood there shivering beside the security desk. I was heading downstairs to fix a payroll issue when I noticed her struggling to breathe, not dramatically, quietly, like someone trying very hard not to become a burden. I walked her to the break room, made her tea, and found out she'd accidentally skipped lunch after a doctor appointment nearby. She kept apologizing for causing trouble. I told her my own mother said the same thing every time she needed help. The old woman smiled at that. 2 days later, my boss suddenly thanked me for taking care of family. That's when I realized who she was. Marjorie Vance, mother of Carson Vance, CEO of Vance Point Logistics. The same Carson Vance who loved posting LinkedIn speeches about people-first leadership while making employees cry in conference rooms behind frosted glass. I'd worked at Vance Point for almost 11 years. Officially, I was Senior Operations Coordinator. Unofficially, I was the guy fixing disasters nobody else wanted attached to their name. Vendor failures, payroll disputes, routing collapses, weekend emergencies. I handled all of it while management collected bonuses for strong operational performance. And I stayed quiet, because I needed stability. My father died when I was 26, right after my younger brother disappeared into a gambling addiction spiral that drained what little savings we had left. After that, it was just me and my mother. Her arthritis had gotten worse over the years, and lately her medical bills sat stacked on our kitchen counter like unpaid threats. Every paycheck already had a destination before it arrived. Mortgage, medication, utilities, physical therapy. There wasn't room for pride in my life anymore. That's probably why Carson liked me. Reliable people are easy to exploit because they confuse endurance with loyalty. The company itself looked impressive from the outside. Downtown Chicago office, modern glass building, diversity awards hanging across the lobby walls, social media videos showing smiling employees volunteering at food drives. But inside, people whispered before speaking. Nobody took lunch breaks without checking who was watching. Managers scheduled optional weekend meetings that somehow affected performance reviews if you missed them. And Carson ruled everything through fear, wrapped in fake charisma. He had this polished public voice he used during company events. Calm, inspirational, controlled. But privately, he'd humiliate people over microscopic mistakes. One supervisor got berated for using the wrong font size in a presentation. Another employee cried in the parking garage after Carson mocked his stutter during a staff meeting. HR never did anything, because HR reported directly to Carson. Around early April, the company started heavily promoting its annual Mother's Day Employee Appreciation Brunch. Carson made it sound massive this year. Catered event, family invitations, charity donations honoring working mothers. He even filmed a video saying, "Vance Point isn't just a company, we're family." Most employees rolled their eyes after watching it. But attendance wasn't optional, especially for leadership staff like me. The week before the brunch, something strange started happening. Accounting access became restricted. Certain expense files disappeared from shared systems. And late one night, while reviewing transportation reports, I noticed several charity reimbursement numbers didn't match archived payment records I'd approved months earlier. At first, I assumed it was another accounting correction, until I saw my employee authorization attached to purchases I never approved. My stomach dropped so fast, I physically leaned against my desk. Someone had used my credentials. And before I could investigate further, Carson called me into his office the next morning, smiling wider than usual. That should have been my warning. Mother's Day brunch started at 11 sharp inside the Grand Harbor Ballroom overlooking the river. Everything looked expensive enough to impress investors. White linen tables, gold centerpieces, violin music floating through hidden speakers, employees walking around in business casual outfits, pretending they actually liked each other outside work hours. My mother wore her best navy blue dress, the same one she saved for weddings and funerals. She kept smiling at everything. The flowers, the dessert table, the company banners hanging from the walls that read, "Celebrating the families behind our success." I remember feeling guilty watching her enjoy herself, because deep down, something already felt wrong. Carson was acting too cheerful. He moved through the ballroom shaking hands like a politician, 2 weeks before an election. Every laugh sounded rehearsed. Every compliment felt calculated. Even his wife looked exhausted, standing beside him, smiling for photos. Around noon, employees were asked to gather near the stage for a special recognition presentation. That's when my chest tightened, because Carson suddenly called my name first. Not the department heads, not the award recipients. Me. People clapped politely while I stood and walked toward the stage. My mother looked proud enough to cry. She grabbed my hand as I passed and whispered, "You deserve this." God, that sentence still messes with me. The second I stepped onto the stage, Carson's expression changed. Completely. His smile vanished so fast it felt like watching theater curtains drop. He adjusted the microphone and said, "Unfortunately, not every employee here today represents the values this company stands for." The room went silent. At first, I honestly thought he was joking. Then a slideshow appeared behind us. My employee profile photo filled the giant projector screen. Underneath it were financial spreadsheets, expense approvals, transaction summaries, my name highlighted in red. I felt all the blood leave my face. Carson sighed dramatically into the microphone like he was personally heartbroken by the situation. After an internal review, he said, "We uncovered evidence of unauthorized financial manipulation connected to charity reimbursement accounts." A few people gasped. One woman near the front actually covered her mouth. I turned toward Carson so fast my chair nearly tipped over. "What are you doing?" I whispered. He didn't even look at me. Instead, he kept speaking directly to the audience. "We trusted him," Carson continued. "And betrayal inside a company family hurts everyone." Company family. That phrase nearly made me sick. I could hear whispers spreading across the ballroom now. Coworkers avoiding eye contact, managers staring at their phones, somebody recording on their camera. My mother looked completely confused. She kept glancing between me and the projector screen like her brain physically couldn't process what was happening. I stepped toward the microphone. "This isn't real," I said. "Those approvals were altered." Carson finally turned toward me with perfectly controlled disappointment. "Please don't make this harder on yourself." That line was calculated. Not angry, not emotional, worse, polished, like he'd rehearsed it in front of a mirror. Security appeared near the stage entrance almost immediately. That's when panic finally hit me. Not fear of losing the job, fear of realization. This was planned, every second of it. The public setting, the family audience, the Mother's Day theme. He wanted humiliation, not termination. I looked toward HR Director Cynthia Hale sitting near the investor table. She lowered her eyes instantly. And that's when I understood something terrifying. They already knew, all of them. Maybe not the details, but enough to know somebody was getting sacrificed today. I grabbed the printed financial packet Carson placed on the podium and flipped through it with shaking hands. The numbers were real, but the timestamps weren't. Entire approval chains had been modified. Dates changed. Digital signatures duplicated. Whoever did this understood the company systems extremely well. Then I saw it. A transportation charity transfer connected to an account Carson personally supervised. $28,000. Moved 3 separate times. My name attached to every authorization. Carson leaned closer and quietly muttered, without moving his smile, "You should have stopped digging." My pulse exploded. That confirmed everything. This wasn't damage control anymore. It was a warning execution, and he was making an example out of me in front of the entire company. My mother suddenly stood from her chair. Her voice shook when she spoke. My son didn't steal anything. The ballroom froze again. I'll never forget Carson's expression in that moment. Annoyance, not guilt. Annoyance that she interrupted his performance. He gave her this fake sympathetic look and said, "I understand this is emotional, ma'am." "Don't call me ma'am," she snapped. I'd never heard my mother sound like that before. For one second, I actually thought she might walk onto the stage herself. But then Carson delivered the final blow. "As of today," he announced into the microphone, "your employment with Vance Point is terminated effective immediately." Security stepped beside me. One reached for my company badge. And right before I handed it over, the ballroom doors opened. Every head in the ballroom turned toward the entrance. An elderly woman stood there beside one of the hotel staff members, still wearing a cream-colored coat despite the warm room. Her silver hair was slightly windblown, like she'd rushed in from outside. In one hand, she carried a leather folder pressed tightly against her chest. Marjorie Vance, Carson's mother. The room changed instantly. Executives straightened in their seats. Managers stopped whispering. Even Carson looked caught off guard for half a second before forcing another polished smile across his face. "Mom," he said carefully, stepping off stage. "I didn't know you were coming." But she wasn't looking at him. She was staring directly at me, then at my mother, then back at the projector screen showing my face beside the fraud accusations. Her expression hardened slowly, not shocked, disappointed. The dangerous kind of disappointed only parents can give. Carson tried guiding her toward a front table, already slipping back into performance mode. "We're handling an internal personnel matter," he explained quietly. Marjorie pulled her arm away. "What exactly are you handling?" The ballroom became so silent I could hear silverware clinking somewhere near the back tables. Carson laughed softly, like the situation was under control. "An employee violated company financial policy." She looked at the spreadsheets on the projector another time. Then she asked the question that changed the energy in the room completely. "Why is his authorization code attached to accounts that were locked last February?" Carson froze. "Barely. But I saw it. So did Cynthia from HR. So did two executives sitting near the investor tables." Tiny reactions expose people faster than screaming ever does. Carson recovered quickly. "Mom, this isn't the place." "No," she interrupted. "I think this is exactly the place." My heartbeat slammed against my ribs. Because suddenly, I wasn't the only confused person in the room anymore. Marjorie slowly opened the leather folder she'd brought with her. Inside were printed financial reports, archived ledgers, audit requests, emails. She looked at Carson with something colder than anger. Embarrassment. The kind powerful families try desperately to hide in public. "You told me the charity division restructuring was clean," she said. "You told me employee reimbursements were verified." Carson lowered his voice sharply. "We'll discuss this privately." But she ignored him completely and turned toward me instead. "What's your name again?" "Ethan," I answered automatically. She nodded slowly. "I remember you." That sentence hit Carson harder than any accusation so far, because suddenly the room understood something important. I wasn't random. And whatever relationship existed between me and Marjorie clearly wasn't supposed to matter today. Carson stepped closer to me now, smile completely gone. "You need to leave," he muttered under his breath. Not requested. Threatened. And honestly, that scared me more than the public firing did. Because powerful men only panic when something threatens exposure. Security still stood beside me awkwardly waiting for instructions. One of them quietly lowered his hand from my shoulder after noticing Marjorie watching. The entire performance was collapsing, but I was too emotionally wrecked to feel victorious yet. My hands still wouldn't stop shaking. My mother looked pale, sitting alone near the front table, clutching her purse with both hands like she was trying to physically hold herself together. I walked off stage toward her in a complete mental fog. Nobody stopped me now. Not security, not HR, not Carson. People just stared. Some looked guilty. Others looked relieved they weren't the target. One coworker I'd trained for almost 4 years finally whispered as I passed, "I'm sorry, I didn't answer." Because apologies inside toxic companies usually arrive after survival becomes safe. Outside the ballroom, the hotel hallway felt freezing cold compared to the fake warmth inside. My mother and I sat silently on a bench near the elevators, while guests walked past pretending not to recognize me. Neither of us spoke for almost 2 full minutes. Then she quietly asked, "Did they really do this because you found something?" I looked at her. Really looked at her. The tired eyes, the forced calmness, the embarrassment she was trying so hard not to show. And suddenly the humiliation hit me harder than before. Not because I lost the job, because she watched it happen. In public, on Mother's Day. I leaned forward with my elbows on my knees and felt my chest tighten so badly I thought I might actually throw up. For 11 years, I gave that company everything. Late nights, weekends, hospital calls answered during family dinners, vacations canceled because Carson wanted dedicated leadership. And in less than 10 minutes, they turned me into a criminal in front of my own mother. My phone started vibrating nonstop. Coworkers, HR emails, unknown numbers, fake sympathy messages already arriving. One text read, "Crazy situation today. Hope you're okay." I almost laughed. People always become compassionate once the danger passes them. Then another notification appeared, an automatic system alert from an old archived operations server I used to manage years ago. The subject line made my stomach drop instantly. "Restored access log detected." I opened it, and there it was. A hidden backup archive containing deleted reimbursement records, including the original transaction histories before they were altered, including Carson's approvals, including timestamps, including everything. For the first time that entire day, I realized they may have destroyed the wrong employee. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Carson standing on that stage smiling while my mother sat frozen in the front row, trying not to cry. By 3 in the morning, my living room looked like an evidence bunker. Laptop open, coffee gone cold, printed transaction records scattered across the floor. I kept comparing the archived files from the backup server against the documents Carson used during the brunch presentation. The differences were impossible to ignore once you knew where to look. Authorization chains rewritten, approval times altered, vendor accounts rerouted through temporary holding numbers. And every fraudulent transfer eventually circled back toward executive-controlled budgets. Not directly. Smart people never steal directly. They hide money behind consulting adjustments, charity logistics, and temporary operational reimbursements nobody audits carefully. But Carson got greedy. That was his mistake. The charity division expanded too fast, and he started moving larger amounts assuming nobody below executive level understood the systems deeply enough to trace them. Unfortunately for him, I built half those systems. Around dawn, I called the only person I trusted inside corporate compliance. Graham Mercer, former regional auditor, fired 8 months earlier for what the company publicly called leadership incompatibility, which basically translated to, he asked too many dangerous questions. Graham answered on the second ring sounding half asleep. "Ethan, I think they framed me." Silence. Then, "How much did you find?" That response told me everything. He already suspected. By noon, we were sitting inside a tiny diner 40 minutes outside downtown because Graham refused to discuss sensitive things near financial districts anymore. Paranoia changes people after corporate retaliation. He reviewed the files quietly while chewing aspirin like candy. Finally, he leaned back in the booth and exhaled hard. "This is bigger than charity fraud." "How big?" "Executive prison big." The words didn't even feel real. Graham pointed towards several vendor transfers highlighted on my laptop. "These shell accounts," he explained, "they're not random reimbursements. They're layered diversions. Somebody's laundering operational money through nonprofit tax channels." I stared at him. "You're saying Carson's stealing from his own charity programs?" "Not just stealing," Graham replied. "Covering executive bonuses during budget shortages." My pulse started climbing again, because suddenly everything from the past year made sense. The aggressive layoffs, frozen salaries, department budget cuts. Meanwhile, Carson kept posting luxury leadership retreats on LinkedIn talking about record growth. I felt physically sick. Not because corruption surprised me, because I defended that company for years. I sacrificed relationships for it, missed holidays for it, watched coworkers burn out, protecting executive reputations that were rotten the entire time. And somehow they still needed someone lower to blame when the numbers stopped balancing. Me. Over the next several days, Graham helped me organize everything chronologically, not emotionally, legally. That distinction mattered. Angry people lose cases. Prepared people destroy them. We built timelines, downloaded server histories, recovered archived authorization logs. Then another unexpected break happened. A current employee contacted me anonymously through an encrypted email account. Subject line, "They did this before." Attached were screenshots from an internal finance chat discussing previous liability removals. Human beings reduced to liability removals. One message specifically mentioned Carson needing a clean public example before investor review. My jaw tightened so hard it hurt. He planned the Mother's Day firing because it created emotional distraction. Nobody questions accounting details when there's public shame and performance theater happening at the same time. That man weaponized humiliation strategically. 2 nights later, while reviewing evidence with Graham, my phone rang from an unknown number. I almost ignored it. Then I answered. A calm, older woman spoke immediately. "Ethan, this is Marjorie Vance." Every muscle in my body locked. For a second, I genuinely thought it might be another setup. But her next sentence erased that instantly. "My son has underestimated 2 things his entire life," she said quietly. "Paper trails and decent people." I didn't know what to say. Marjorie sounded exhausted. Not dramatic, not emotional. Just deeply tired in a way that made her voice feel older than before. "I reviewed the records after the brunch," she continued. "The files Carson presented were modified." "You knew?" "I suspected," she corrected softly. "Now I know." I leaned back against my kitchen counter, trying to steady my breathing. "Why are you helping me?" There was a long silence before she answered. "Because years ago, when I was recovering from cardiac treatment, a young employee sat with me in a break room while nobody else noticed I could barely stand." I closed my eyes. I remembered that day perfectly now, the shaking in her hands, the untouched teacup, the loneliness. Marjorie continued. "My son built a company that rewards fear. You're one of the last employees who still remembers what dignity looks like." That hit harder than I expected. After everything Carson did, I didn't realize how badly I needed someone to finally say I wasn't crazy. Then Marjorie delivered the sentence that changed the entire war. "I also need you to understand something carefully, Ethan." Her voice became colder. "Carson believes he controls Vance Point." A pause. "He does not." The next evening, Marjorie asked to meet somewhere private. Not the office, not a restaurant. A quiet historical library on the north side of the city that almost nobody visited after sunset. When I arrived, she was already sitting near the back reading tables beneath a brass lamp, wearing dark gloves and surrounded by folders thick enough to look like legal case files. For the first few minutes, she didn't talk about Carson at all. She asked about my mother, my work history, how long I'd been handling operations. It felt less like an interrogation and more like someone trying to understand exactly how much damage had been done to another human being. Then she finally opened one of the folders. Inside were original company incorporation documents, old shareholder agreements, handwritten notes, photos. Vance Point wasn't Carson's company, not originally. Marjorie and her late husband built it 32 years earlier, with 6 employees and 2 delivery trucks. Back then, the company focused on medical supply transportation for low-income clinics across Illinois. "It was never supposed to become this," she said quietly. After her husband died, Marjorie slowly stepped away during cancer treatment and cardiac complications. Carson took over leadership in his early 30s, while she remained majority shareholder through a protected family trust. But Carson assumed something dangerous. He assumed she stopped paying attention. Marjorie slid another document across the table toward me. Internal audit requests. Ignored. Blocked. several signed personally by her. He intercepted everything, she explained. Board reports, compliance concerns, employee complaints. He isolated the executive structure around people loyal to him. I stared at the paperwork in disbelief. You mean the board doesn't know? Oh, some of them know, she replied coldly. But greed makes cowards cooperative. That line stayed with me, because suddenly the company finally made sense. The fear, the silence, the performative culture. People weren't protecting the company. They were protecting access to power. Marjorie then opened the final folder. This one was smaller, more personal. Inside was a photograph I immediately recognized, me, standing beside her in the company break room years earlier, holding a paper cup while she smiled weakly at the camera. I blinked hard. You kept this? You reminded me of my husband, she admitted softly. He believed kindness mattered most when nobody important was watching. For the first time since the firing, my anger cracked slightly under something heavier, grief. Because companies like VancePoint don't destroy people overnight. They slowly train good employees to believe survival matters more than integrity, until nobody recognizes themselves anymore. Marjorie leaned closer now. I investigated quietly for months after several executive accounts stopped matching foundation records, she said. But your public firing confirmed something. What? Carson panicked. That word mattered, because powerful people only make messy emotional decisions when control starts slipping. And humiliating me publicly on Mother's Day. That wasn't strategy anymore. That was fear disguised as dominance. Then Marjorie revealed the final piece. The thing Carson never expected anyone to use against him. The family trust controlling VancePoint voting shares had never transferred fully into his authority. Legally, Marjorie still controlled 51% of the company. I actually stopped breathing for a second. He doesn't know the updated trust conditions finalized after my surgery, she explained calmly. His legal team assumed inactive authority meant surrendered authority. So technically, I can remove him. The library suddenly felt too quiet, too still. Years of manipulation, fear, public humiliation, financial fraud. And the man responsible never realized the person capable of destroying him had been sitting quietly outside his office this entire time. But Marjorie wasn't smiling. If anything, she looked heartbroken. Because this wasn't just business to her. It was her son. And somehow, that made the whole thing even darker. She carefully closed the folders and looked directly at me. When this moves forward, Ethan, it will become ugly very quickly. I thought about my mother sitting silently beside me outside that ballroom. The shame in her eyes, the helplessness. Then I thought about Carson smiling into a microphone while destroying someone's life for protection. My answer came easy. It already has. The emergency executive meeting happened 3 days later on the 42nd floor of VancePoint headquarters. Same building, same lobby, same security desk where I'd spent 11 years walking through before sunrise carrying coffee and fixing problems nobody appreciated. But this time, people looked nervous when I entered. Not superior. Nervous. Word had already spread that investors demanded answers after rumors from the Mother's Day incident leaked outside internal channels. Carson tried controlling the narrative online, but public humiliation works both ways once witnesses start talking. Especially in corporate America. People stay silent during power, then suddenly become brave near collapse. The conference room itself looked designed for intimidation. Long black glass table. City skyline behind floor-to-ceiling windows. Executive chairs positioned like courtroom seating. Carson sat near the center, wearing a navy suit and a perfectly calm expression that almost fooled me for a second. Almost. Because I could see it now. The tightness around his jaw. The restless tapping against his coffee cup. The tiny signs powerful men show when control starts slipping through their fingers. Several board members avoided looking directly at me as I entered with Graham beside me, carrying 2 locked document cases. Cynthia from HR looked physically sick. Good. She should have. Carson folded his hands together. Interesting choice bringing outside parties into internal matters, he said smoothly. Graham gave a dry laugh. Financial fraud stopped being internal the second federal reporting laws got involved. The room shifted instantly. Executives straightened. One investor lowered his glasses slowly. Carson's expression barely changed, but his eyes hardened. He still believed he could outmaneuver this. That's what narcissistic leaders always think. They confuse fear with loyalty. For so long they forget people only obey, while consequences feel distant. Then the conference room doors opened. Marjorie walked in. No dramatic entrance, no raised voice, no performance. And somehow that made it 10 times more terrifying. Every single executive stood up immediately. Even Carson. "Mom," he said sharply, "you shouldn't be here." Marjorie ignored him completely and took the empty seat at the head of the table. His seat, the symbolic shift alone, nearly suffocated the room. She placed several folders down carefully before speaking. "I reviewed the evidence personally." Silence. Carson leaned back, forcing a smile again. "With respect, you've been misinformed by emotional employees trying to protect themselves." I almost laughed hearing that, because suddenly I realized something. He still thought this meeting was about me. Marjorie opened the first folder. "Unauthorized executive transfers," she said calmly. Second folder. "Manipulated charity reimbursements." Third folder. "Retaliatory termination planning." Then she slid printed email screenshots across the glass table. The same internal messages discussing liability removals. One board member cursed under his breath reading them. Another executive went completely pale. Carson's confidence cracked for the first time. "These documents are being misinterpreted," he snapped. "No," Marjorie replied quietly. "You simply underestimated how many copies existed." That line landed like a gunshot. Graham connected a laptop to the conference room screen and began displaying recovered server histories. Original timestamps, deleted authorization edits, executive rerouting chains, and finally, video footage logs showing Carson personally accessing restricted reimbursement accounts using my employee credentials weeks before the Mother's Day brunch. The room exploded. Questions, accusations, everybody speaking at once. One investor stood up furious, demanding legal explanations, while Cynthia from HR started crying silently beside the window. Carson slammed his hand against the table. "This is ridiculous," he shouted. "You're all acting like I'm some criminal while this company exists because of me." "No," Marjorie said. The room stopped instantly. Her voice never got louder. It didn't need to. "This company existed before you," she continued, "and it may survive after you if we're lucky." Carson looked stunned hearing that from her. Not angry, wounded, like a man suddenly realizing power doesn't protect him from disappointment. Then Marjorie delivered the final blow. As majority-controlling shareholder, she announced calmly, "I am invoking emergency authority effective immediately." Every eye locked onto her. "Carson Vance is hereby removed from all executive leadership responsibilities pending full criminal and financial investigation." Dead silence. Absolute silence. The kind that 3 weeks later, Carson's face disappeared from the company website. Then from LinkedIn. Then from every leadership brochure Vance Point had spent years pushing across corporate conferences and business magazines. Federal investigators officially opened financial misconduct inquiries tied to executive charity accounts. Several senior managers resigned before interviews even began. HR departments were restructured. Internal audits expanded across every regional branch. And suddenly all those employees who once stayed silent started talking like survivors after a storm finally passed. Some apologized to me directly. Others couldn't even meet my eyes. I didn't hate them anymore. Fear changes people inside toxic workplaces. After enough pressure, survival becomes more important than courage. That realization hurt more than the firing itself. My own situation stabilized slowly, painfully slowly. Not movie-style overnight success. No giant settlement check magically fixing everything. But my reputation came back. Former clients reached out privately after hearing what happened. One logistics firm offered me a senior operations role within days after the investigation became public. Another company asked if I'd consult during their compliance restructuring. For the first time in years, Opportunities came without manipulation attached to them. The strangest moment happened on a quiet Thursday afternoon. My mother and I were sitting outside a small lakefront cafe sharing coffee, when she suddenly smiled at me over her cup and said, "You looked lighter this morning." I didn't realize she was right until then. For years I'd been carrying constant tension without noticing it. The late-night panic, the pressure, the exhaustion of surviving inside a company where fear was mistaken for professionalism. And now it was gone. A week later, Marjorie asked to meet one final time. This time at Vance Point headquarters. Only the building felt different now. Quieter, less performative. She offered me a formal position, helping rebuild operational ethics and employee accountability systems from the inside. Not because she wanted loyalty, because she wanted honesty somewhere near leadership again. I thought about it carefully before answering. Then I accepted, but with conditions. Transparent reporting, independent compliance oversight, no executive immunity. Marjorie smiled for the first time since I'd known her. "Good," she said softly. "That means you learned something from all this." And honestly, I had. Because sometimes the worst day of your life doesn't destroy you. Sometimes it finally introduces you to the people who were destroying everything around you all along. A month later, I found myself standing in the same ballroom where everything had fallen apart. Same chandeliers, same polished floors. But it didn't feel the same anymore. There was no Mother's Day brunch this time. No staged speeches. No fake smiles for investors. Just an internal ethics review meeting with a completely different tone in the air. Quieter, more cautious. Almost like the building itself had learned fear in reverse. I stayed near the back of the room while new compliance policies were being presented. My role wasn't to dominate anything. It was to make sure what happened to me couldn't quietly happen to someone else again. At one point, I noticed a junior employee watching the proceedings with the same nervous expression I once had. That version of me felt distant now. Not gone, just changed. My phone buzzed once in my pocket. A message from my mother. "Proud of you. Come home early. I made food." I stared at it for a second longer than I needed to. Because that was the real victory, not the exposure, not the investigation, not the company correction. It was the fact that I could finally go home without feeling like I was carrying invisible chains with me. As I left the building that evening, the city felt different too. Same streets, same noise, but something inside me had stopped bracing for impact. Carson once tried to turn my humiliation into a warning for everyone else. But in the end, it became a warning about him instead. And sometimes that's how it works in real life. People think power protects them forever, until the truth walks into the room holding a folder. And this time, no one asks it to leave.